While there is a lot to learn from men such as Guts, I believe that the observation of someone who might not be as mentally resilient can open a much more relatable window into the human psyche. The story of the Black Swordsman is one that many around the globe have found greatly motivational, but at the end of the day, and despite all the darkness that our hero had to deal with, it still told the tale of a winner. Corkus is not that. He is the quintessential loser, a man with almost no redeeming qualities, who accomplished nothing of note and died a meaningless death. Paradoxically, this is also what makes him a fascinating case study. By analyzing his life, we can pinpoint his flaws and make sure to avoid them. First of all, Corkus is a realist. In the band of the arc, he is always the one to temper the ardors of others. This isn't done in an effort to be the voice of reason. Instead, he's constantly making sure to lower the ambitions of those around him, in an effort to feel better about himself. You will meet many men like that in life, who will tell you that they are the only ones to see the world for what it truly is. A hopeless place where efforts and passions have no meaning. This is nihilism disguised as realism, often conveyed through mockery, the target of ridicule being any concept or belief that contradicts a fatalistic view of the world, where the cards were distributed at birth and any effort to change one's destiny is useless. This ideology is always pushed by losers in an effort to relinquish responsibility for their failures. This type also has a tendency to be obsessed with statuses and ranks, as the only validation they can derive comes from external wealth, their inner self being as dry and infertile as a salt desert. An identity in shambles has two choices: either rebuild itself, or exist through the acceptation of others. Losers like Corkus always select the second option, which also results in them never being able to develop self-worth. To fill the gap in their chest, they chase material riches, the pursuit of self-improvement being one they abandoned a long time ago. Worse, they've come to believe that there is no changing who they are, transforming their helplessness into an ideology that they then push onto others. Berserk is a manga that concerns itself greatly with determinism, a concept misunderstood by many, but that I plan to cover in details. Here, it is enough to say that Corkus represents its dark side, known as fatalism. Once infected with that defeatist mindset, the loser cannot stand to look at people who haven't given up, which explains why Corkus hates Guts, on the sole basis of him refusing to espouse the black pill. It should be noted that our hero led a tremendously more challenging life than Corkus, as he went through hardship and trauma that would have made him the perfect candidate to become a doomer. This shows one thing: while the environment absolutely plays a role in an individual's development, what truly decides whether or not that person thrives is their interactions with it. Something that Corkus will never understand, because he sees greatness as an innate quality instead of a set of actions. Of course, because no one wants to be a loser, Corkus cannot straight up admit that he's given up on life, so he relies on the oldest trick in the book: an inversion of values. In his reality, those that struggle against fate are the losers, because life is predetermined, meaning that there is no point in even trying. The issue is that those are lies that only contribute to a delusion, which has no bearing on the nature of this world, in which tryhards are always favored. An easy trick to detect a loser is to pay attention to the way they react to confidence. A mentally healthy male with a complete soul and a positive outlook on life will see it as something worth cultivating in himself. A coward, however, will come to immediately resent it. To Corkus, Guts' confidence is nothing but arrogance. He is simply incapable of understanding how someone could have faith in themselves. And of course, when faced with a foreign concept, it is always easier to simply call it childish and stupid, instead of having to face the unknown. Watch out for this trait in yourself. It is the start of ignorance, which inevitably leads to weakness. Corkus is the final product of this formula. He joined the Orcs because his band got defeated by them, and ever since then, he's been a subservient. He refuses to believe in dreams, not because he finds them logically worthless, but because he used to have one and let it die. Instead of accepting responsibility and trying again, he convinced himself that he simply didn't have enough talent to succeed, turning his back on virtue and becoming a materialistic husk of a man. Miura depicting him as refusing to offer charity to a beggar is no mistake. Those that can expend their strength to help others while expecting nothing in return are the strong. Misers are lacking in masculinity because they have nothing to spare. We all run the risk of becoming like that. As you come to chase a dream, beware that you not lose sight of it, or that you start chasing another man's by mistake. If your goal looks out of reach, keep struggling, but never, ever let yourself believe that fulfilling something you have no true passion for will lead to happiness. At best, you'll end up like Judo, who became an accessory to Griffith and ended up paying it with his life, left with nothing but regrets. At worst, you'll become a Corkus, whose sole purpose in life is to drag other people down with him. Between the two, there is no doubt that it is best to become a Judo, although there is something tragical in a man able to see the light in others, but not in himself. More despicable is the man whose jealousy seeks to extinguish the flame of his neighbor, for he is not only unable to see the value of the light, but has also come to abhor its existence, in himself and others. People like Corkus console themselves via coping mechanisms that lead them to believe that they were born unexceptional. So when someone like Guts, who spit the black pill and refuses to fall into despair, shows up, their natural reaction is to hate him, as he blows a hole in their theory. Corkus even entertained the idea of assassinating him, from behind using a bowgun like the good coward he is, simply to not have to face the reality check that the existence of the strong imposes on the weak. The fact that all his provocations never managed to prompt anything but a stoic stare from the swordsman adds to the frustration, as the only weapon of a nihilist is his tongue, with which he injects poison. Alas for him, la bave du crapaud n'atteint pas la blanche colombe. You will have noticed by now that Corkus is an extremely emotional man. There is nothing wrong with having feelings. However, there is a problem with not being able to control them. Add to that the fact that the only emotions he feels are negative ones, and you end up with the perfect example of someone who is a dead weight to those around him. Guts is the exact opposite. He doesn't burden others with his distress, and focuses on fixing the self through inner work, rather than to blame its state on others. This restraint is born of pride, and manifests itself externally through a firm composure accompanied with the air of certitude that one comes to expect from an indomitable spirit. Any soul well born would find the exclamation, "Don't be so proud," to be ridiculous, but in the mouth of a loser, it makes total sense. In the twisted world of the Untermensch, pride is seen as a fault, and self-depreciation as a virtue. To someone like Corkus, Guts commits great sins just by existing. This is why he keeps repeating, "You're not special." He cannot stand the idea of someone feeling good about themselves, and so he tries to take that away any chance he has. This, in turn, betrays the ideological inconsistency inherent to Corkus' belief system, as his little nihilistic shtick quickly falls apart when you realize that he worships Griffith like a god. In his eye, he is the only human to have transcended fate. If Guts manages it as well, then he can't keep telling himself that his commander is special. The exception will become the rule, and he will have to face the truth, that the problem was with him, not the wood. And when the illusion he built for himself falls apart at the instance of Guts besting Griffith, what does he do? He copes some more. There is no limit to how pathetic you can become if you always run away from reality. This is your brain on nihilism. Regardless of the circumstances, a spirit that has tapped out will always fail to recognize its own agency and the role it plays in the world. Corkus has no faith in himself, and therefore no faith in others. His lifestyle is entirely despondent, as he has come to believe that his actions have no effect on his destiny. Many people who suffer setbacks or difficulties in their lives turn out like this, failing to understand that their misery was directly caused by their own doings, meaning that it's their responsibility to not repeat past mistakes and learn from them. The man that always thinks it wasn't his fault never progresses, and ends up a sad sack of self-pitying misery. Note, however, that Corkus refused to leave the band, despite having no faith in its future. This is because on top of being a downer, he's also a coward. He doesn't want to lose the refuge that a troop of men offers. In that, he is also different from Guts, who left the Ox the second he felt that his individuality was being threatened by it. Weak men always welcome the warm embrace of the earth, as it allows them to blend their identity with that of others, diluting their personal responsibility into the lukewarm soup of the group. This hesitancy to leave the protection of a collective speaks to Corkus' appetence for comfort, a trait that one would do well to combat, as self-betterment is scarcely found in the reassurance of the crowd. Those that perpetually stay huddled around the fire will never come to experience the horrors of the night, and as such, they will also never temper their steel in its frights. Making safety a priority has never bred strong men. And unlike what a collectivist bias might infer, it doesn't make you a good comrade either, as the integrity of the group relies on the solidity of its members. Corkus is a despicable companion, which is paradoxical considering that he only exists through the identity of the group. The only type of satisfaction he could ever derive came from Griffith's accomplishments, which explains why he sees him as a god. By allowing his individuality to be overtaken by another more powerful one, he chain-linked his fate to another man's destiny, something that Guts intuitively perceived as a potential death sentence for the self.
Griffith is exceptional and you are beneath him. You might be grateful for the rank and position that Griffith and no one else saw fit to bestow upon you. The position an ass like you does not deserve.
I don't want what another man can give me. If he grants me anything, then it's his to give and not my own.
Now you sound like a goddamn woman.
This is a reality that Corkus has come to understand, but refuses to face. By defeating Griffith, Guts removed his godship, leading to the realization that following him blindly was a mistake. This is where the hate comes from, but for Corkus to admit that would take to also recognize that he is the engineer of this misery, as he derailed his own life by ending its reigns to another man. Regardless of whether or not he accepts it, this is a reality he will not escape, and as is customary of weak men, the train wreck will be entirely out of his control. See, the line between adoration and hate is thin, and often depends on the ability of the adored to provide the worshipper with whatever benefits he received in exchange for his submission. When the boon stops flowing, the idolater turns on God. In this case, Corkus could never come to detest Griffith, as the mind conditioning runs too deep. Instead, he operates a transfer onto Guts, who he sees as responsible for the band's demise. This is again a massive contradiction. He refuses to recognize Guts as special, but he also expects him to come save his ass when situations turn sour. Such a childlike mentality is what makes him an Untermensch. He never actually grew up into the man he could have become, because he's made helplessness into a religion. I won't dwell too much on the irony of Corkus refusing to call Guts his comrade when the former has bled himself dry for the sake of the troop, while our coward-in-chief spent every battle squandering his men and complaining that the riders stole all the glory. There is no mistaking it. Corkus is deeply jealous of Guts, to the point that he couldn't wait to take his spot as captain, a role that he was completely incapable of fulfilling. There is something to be said about a being so devoid of individuality that it can only live through the worship of other men or the copying of their every move, without any semblance of personal identity. Never allow yourself to exist as anything but yourself. Ever. The saddest part about men like Corkus is that underneath their jaded exterior, they still conserve the hope that their condition will improve. Of course, they will never admit it, as it would force them to face the fact that if it doesn't, it's entirely their fault. Thus, they rely on external factors. They secretly wait for the day when someone is going to come save them. Newsflash, wimp, that person is you. The panel of Corkus breaking his sword on a rock is no innocent inclusion by Miura, as this character functions as the anti-gods. It is therefore quite telling that he would willingly shatter his mean of protection, effectively surrendering the fight before it even started. Meanwhile, Guts fought with a broken sword during the eclipse. This shows the difference of resolve between the two men, which ultimately dictates their fates. For anyone who's been around such wuss, you must be familiar with their most aggravating character trait: constant self-pitying. They think the wood is out to get them, and when it eventually does due to their lack of proactivity, they see it as the sign that they were right all along. This is when the mind falls in love with its own demise. There is something eerie to be found in negative portion, when Eros and Thanatos become one. The mortification of the self turning into the ultimate transgressive pleasure. If you know someone like that, understand one thing: you cannot help these people. The more attention you give them when they sulk, the more you teach them that the way to receive validation is to act helpless. This is the crybaby cycle. Tough love is the antidote, but they have to deliver it themselves. And if they choose not to, like many losers do, then life will be sure to administer the dose. You can feed your delusions as much as you want. One day, the reality of this world will be knocking on the door. That moment for Corkus was the eclipse. He was left entirely alone in the midst of a chaotic occurrence that the existence of the group could not protect him from, seeing as how it got decimated alongside him. This is the perfect allegory of what happens to dependents. Once whatever external institution they rely on dies, they die with it. They're also entirely useless in attempting to save it, which is logical since you've never seen a parasite save its host. Corkus, who always depended on the group for survival, was the first to abandon it when his life was in danger, leaving his troops to die, while men like Pippin, Judo and Guts violently sacrificed themselves for the collective. A coward is no friend. His non-existent self-worth turned out to be the end of him. Often, people think that a man who lacks in confidence will be the one to suffer from it, but they forget that humans are social creatures, and that there will always be people who rely on you. The essence of masculinity is to possess such strength that you can shelter many a soul, who will in turn become shields themselves. This is how a strong individuality gives birth to a strong collective. Corkus entirely failed in that aspect. He couldn't protect his men because he can't even protect himself. Had he not been a wimp, his circumstances might have been different, but it's too late for that. So instead, he does what he's always done. He copes. He tells himself that surely this is just a dream. That life, this earth that we call home, has always been nothing but an illusion. Because if nothing matters, then your failures don't either. Notice that he doesn't have a single thought to spare for his fallen comrades. He only cares about himself. Disgusting nihilist scum. When you believe in nothing, you end up becoming nothing. Such was Corkus's ideal. To be nobody. To not raise expectations. To forego duty. To finally be allowed to step into the void. One that lives a meaningless life often dies a meaningless death. And what better fate for someone like Corkus than to die in the arms of a woman, once again blind to the real nature of the entity that he so blissfully embraced. What tongue-in-cheek irony that he would find death in the place of his most marked desire. As if the author tried to say that his lack of ambition and hedonism already had him a walking dead, just a wandering carcass waiting to be ended for good. Such is the nature of the coward, who runs away from life without realizing he's already lost it. Good night, Untermensch. You never really mattered.